The following episode and message is sponsored by Baxter. Can screen time be good for you? It can in infusion delivery when it's the exclusive on-screen barcode of Baxter's Novum IQ infusion platform. No more fading or peeling stickers. It's an easy and reliable way to associate pump to patient. Another reason Novum IQ is a pump platform like no other. Learn more at discovernovumiq.com. Hello, and welcome to NANcast. I'm Jill, your host. Today's episode is a very special one as we shine a spotlight on the incredible nurses who make up the heart and soul of the NICU. NICU nurses are the unsung heroes caring for the tiniest and most vulnerable patients and families who need life-saving care and compassion from the very beginning of their lives. But what many may not realize is that NICU nursing encompasses a wide range of roles, each playing a crucial part in ensuring that these babies get the best possible start. From the bedside nurses who provide hands-on care, to the neonatal nurse practitioners making critical medical decisions, to the clinical educators training the next generation of NICU nurses, and those in academia pushing forward research and innovation, each role brings something unique and essential to the team. Today, we're celebrating all of these roles and the amazing nurses who perform them. We'll dive into what makes each position so important, the challenges and rewards they face, and how they work together to provide comprehensive, cutting-edge care in the NICU. Let's get right into it and meet some of the NICU nurses who bring hope and healing every day. Thank you, ladies, for joining us today as we celebrate your contributions to the NICU. Can each of you briefly describe your specific role in the NICU and how it contributes to the overall care of our tiny babies?
Yeah, so my name's Heather. I work at the University of Michigan, and I have several roles, and I think that most of us as nurses do. So I'm a neonatal nurse practitioner clinically, and so I'm out on the floor rounding and making plans for babies. I also precept new nursing NNP students as well as recently hired nurse practitioners, which I think for me, I firmly believe that teaching and that legacy also highly contributes to the care of our babies because we are kind of passing down that knowledge. And then I also teach at Michigan State University. I teach residents and future nurse practitioners as well as nursing students. And again, kind of that teaching piece, like leaving that legacy and contributing to the care of our babies. And then lots of QI, and I also do the transport/survival flight role in our NICU. And so we are a level 4, and so we take babies from all over the state and sometimes pretty far out of our state. I went to Boston the other day to transport a baby. And so lots of care contributions just from bringing babies to these, to our unit to kind of supply resources for them and consultations that they wouldn't be able to get at their current facility. So that's what I am currently doing as a nurse practitioner.
So you mentioned education and the legacy, and I know we have 2 educators with us today. So Heather, do you want to tell us about your role in education in the NICU?
Sure. My name's Heather Stevens. I am a clinical nurse specialist, and I work at Penn State Health Hershey Children's Hospital. My role here is a neonatal clinical practice nurse leader, and I help with educating nurses on nursing policies, making sure we're doing the best evidence-based practice. I facilitate a lot of quality improvement projects, and that includes, it's interdisciplinary, so it includes our medical team, respiratory therapy, PTOT speech, bedside nursing, as well as on a hospital level, I facilitate and am a leader in the Safe Sleep teams. And that involves a lot of education, not only with the bedside nurses, but with also our medical team. And like I said, our ancillary services, RT, PT, speech, and OT.
Yes, so I am Tracy Bell. I am currently an associate professor at the University of Pittsburgh School of Nursing. My primary goal is providing education for neonatal nurse practitioner students. So ultimately working to increase the workforce and raise the next generation of NNPs in our setting. Unofficially, I also work with the undergraduate nursing students trying to demonstrate the importance and the benefit of working in a neonatal intensive care unit. So kind of on the side, working to increase our workforce for neonatal nurses as well. The other part of my role is in the clinical arena where I work as a neonatal nurse practitioner in various hospitals across the country. Again, yes, providing care to the babies, but also trying to encourage others to join us in this passion for taking care of babies and being nurse practitioners, clinical nurse specialists, transport nurses, etc. So really just trying to demonstrate how much fun people can have in this role and the impact that we can give to our patients and their families.
And last and certainly not least is Elizabeth. So tell us about your role in the NICU.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Spear. I am a bedside nurse at Lucille Packard Children's Hospital at Stanford. I do a number of the specialty roles at the bedside, including charge nurse, whole body cooling, ECMO, dialysis, all of those specialties. As a level 4, we also transport in a lot of the sicker kids that couldn't get these services. So I provide that at the bedside. I love it because I'm helping parents through the toughest times. This is certainly what no one expected when they got pregnant and decided to have a baby. And so being able to help them understand all of the craziness that has just been thrust upon them is really important to me, and that's what I love the most.
So both Elizabeth and Heather, the NP, both described varying levels of acuity of the babies that they care for, going to other outside facilities to pick up babies in level 2 NICUs versus to bring them to a level 4 for higher level of care. How does your responsibilities change when you're caring for babies at different level NICUs? So what is like your role difference when you're there? I know, Elizabeth, you do have experience in working in lower level NICUs, level 2s versus 3 and 4. So how does that impact your role?
So level 2 NICUs tend to have a lower acuity, so you're looking at maybe bubble CPAP or high flow nasal cannula. That doesn't lessen the trauma to the parents because, again, this isn't what they expected to have happen. But in those smaller level 2s, you also have to be on your game to recognize when that baby is getting sicker than your facility is able to care for, and working with providers to get them where they need to go.
Yeah, and I think for me, I primarily work in a level 4 and I do contingent in a level 3. And I agree, kind of with what Elizabeth said. The type of patient that you take care of is sometimes a little bit different. In my level 3, I'm essentially growing babies and making sure feeding plans are on track and things like that. In a level 4, I find that I have a little bit the management's a little bit more complicated in terms of we're getting multiple consultants involved. And that can be challenging sometimes when there's a lot of, I guess, hands in the pot. And so it's a lot, it's so much collaboration, so much so. But one thing that I really love that Elizabeth has been talking about is the one thing that doesn't change between the acuity is the amount of trauma and like mental health involvement from these parents and the support that they need from us. And so I really appreciate kind of bringing that up because something that is very, just another day in the office for us, is pretty traumatic for these parents. Even if their baby's on a nasal cannula or if their baby's intubated, I think it's still important to recognize the amount of kind of grief that comes with not having that, what most people think of as like a normal pregnancy, birth, after birth situation. And so that is one thing that is consistent across the levels of NICU, I think, is that support that parents need for themselves and for the infant mental health as well.
I agree. And I think every role has that piece where they interact with the family and have to learn, how do I balance both medical and emotional support for the parents? And even the bedside nurse, the nurse practitioner, the educator, they're all having an impact in this family's daily life in the NICU. And I think we all have that role is all intertwined, whether you're a NICU nurse, bedside nurse, or an educator. So Heather, in your CNS role, what role do you play in bridging the gap between theory and practice for nurses working in the NICU?
So what I do is I help with, I round with the medical teams on a weekly basis. We have two medical teams, and I help bridge that gap, if there's a gap between the nurse's knowledge of why we're doing things and why we're not going to increase a medication dose or why we're using a certain medication. That's really important for the bedside nurse to understand why they're doing things and helping to make sure they're providing the best evidence-based practice they can. I do a lot of incorporating or integrating our bedside nurses into projects whenever there's things that come up. If we're going to be changing a workflow practice, for example, in our delivery room with delayed cord clamping and using a new product, I help the nurses understand why we're doing delayed cord clamping, why that's important, and then work with the medical teams and our women's and babies staff to help facilitate that process and making it as smooth as possible.
Tracy, how do you balance teaching nursing students with your clinical NICU knowledge and experience?
Good question. So I think it's really important to remember as educators that we want to ensure that we are providing the most current, up-to-date evidence for our students. We don't want to go into it with the mindset of, this is the way that we've always done it, and this is how I'm going to train you or educate you. So it is a balancing act between ensuring that I am managing to work clinically to remain abreast of what is truly happening at the bedside, while also having enough time, enough bandwidth to focus on my students and to be available for them. In my role, it would not be uncommon to see me staffing as an NNP while having one of my students as my preceptor with me during their clinical placement at that time. And I think that makes, I hope, me more approachable to the students to understand that I am in the trenches with them. I am struggling just as they are with the long shifts, with the ethical considerations that come from being at work, and that when I tell them I get it, I understand it, it's because I was just there 24 hours ago.
That is so true. I think that in academia, we need to make sure that we are preparing our nurses for not only the technical demands of the job, but also the emotional demands that you have while working in the NICU. So as leaders and educators, how do you help support the emotional well-being of your nurses? I know that both of you are very up to date with including the nurses on practice changes and education and the why they are doing that. But how do you make sure that you maintain the emotional well-being of the nurses and the nurse practitioners in the unit?
So we talk about it. We talk about the hard things. I try to encourage my students as well as the staff that I'm working with clinically to put it out there. Let's address the elephant in the room. When you don't agree with something, say it. Now, be respectful and be professional and courteous in how we do it, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about our feelings. For the nurse practitioner students, we include in the educational curriculum and pathway conversations about self-care and making sure that we understand that we have to give to ourselves to be able to give back to our patients and to our families, and that we are human. There are going to be times that we're not okay, and we just need to acknowledge it, and we need to get the support that we need to be okay so that we can do what's best for our families and for our patients.
As a resource nurse for a 40-bed unit, I have to, I call it my circus. They are my monkeys. I keep them in line, and they love that when I say it. You have to keep things light when you're in these heavy situations with these really sick babies. And I also find it important as a resource nurse, when a particular nurse has had a bad day, yes, I will chat with them, but I also want to make sure that our leadership knows, hey, this brand new graduate had a really bad day. This mom yelled, this baby got sick, whatever it is. I touched base with her, but would you please too? Kind of overseeing everything and touching base with them and helping them through that tough moment, but making sure that other people with maybe more resources can reach out to them as well, and just being aware of what's happening to the nurses on the unit.
I think this brings us to a really important topic of mentorship. I think we can all be mentors to every role, as we've seen how all of our roles are intertwined, and we can all, a new nurse can learn a lot from the charge nurse, but also from the NP, and also the educator. So I think mentorship is an important part of a nurse's role, no matter what level they are. And I think Elizabeth adding leadership involvement with helping these new grads, if they're having a difficult shift, to make sure that they're also being recognized and heard, is really important. So what are some misconceptions people have about the different roles within the NICU?
So I will say that from the education standpoint, I think that there are some overall misconceptions about the NNP role. One of the things that I try to encourage our students and people who are even thinking about becoming students is that there is more to the NNP role than what you see, right? And that we don't just work in NICUs for 24 hours a day, for 7 days a week, which is typically why prospective students tell me that they don't want to be a neonatal NP. That when I am providing education for our students, I am trying to demonstrate to them the full scope of practice, meaning that we are taking care of patients from birth at any gestation up to age 2. That can be in the NICU setting, that can be in a pediatrician's office, that can be in a developmental care clinic, that can be doing global work and traveling to lower resource settings and providing education for them. And it can be in the role that I'm in primarily, which is providing education to the next generation. So there are so many different ways that you can take what you are doing in the NICU and spread it out. And it doesn't just have to be a clock in, clock out, clock in at 7 a.m. and clock out at 7 a.m. the next morning. There's so many other ways that we can ensure that we are providing high quality care to these patients.
Heather, as our NP in the group, is there anything that you would like to add as far as different misconceptions people have about your role? The type of decision making that you have versus what a bedside nurse has versus, the fellow or the resident that's on service.
Yeah. And I think Tracy hit the nail on the head with a lot of things that she said. But also, I think some things that I personally, when I was a bedside nurse, some misconceptions I had that are certainly misconceptions now that I'm in the NP role, is I thought for a while that because I was a very experienced bedside nurse, that role transition would be, oh, this is going to be a piece of cake. I'm going to learn the pathophys and it's going to be amazing and I'm going to be able to make more decisions and this will be great. That was not at all the case. um, there's so much more, it's much more complicated than just learning some pathophys and then being able to make some decisions. It is so involved. I know when I started as a nurse practitioner, my first year was so frustrating, trying to find my place, trying to maintain relationships with bedside nurses. I had the fortunate, I think it was fortunate that I was able to become a nurse practitioner in a unit that didn't know me as a bedside nurse. I think that helped me be able to kind of form my identity as a nurse practitioner. So that was really helpful. And I do, if there's anybody out there considering becoming a nurse practitioner, I encourage that. I encourage kind of spreading your wings and getting out there and allowing yourself to kind of form that identity away from your identity as like just that, not just that bedside nurse and that like, oh, you're just a bed, not that. I'm not saying that, but just like forming your identity as a nurse practitioner somewhere that wasn't, home before. Because it is a different role. You kind of go from a very task-oriented role to this role where you're thinking about being a complete care manager. And it's a role that is very stepwise too. Like at first I was more of a data collector in my nurse practitioner role. And I was just trying to nail down what information do I need to make a plan for this baby. And then I was able to kind of move into that more of an interpreter role. Like, okay, how do I interpret this data? And just from that step to that step took time. And then to take a further step and develop myself as a nurse practitioner, I had to then become a synthesizer. Like I have all this data and I can interpret it. How do I synthesize it and make it for this particular baby? How do I individualize care for this particular baby? And then, once I kind of formed my identity in those pieces, then I was able to become a care manager, and I could look at the baby as a whole and say, this is the pathophys, these are the things that I need to do, this is how I individualize care for this baby. But it takes a lot of time, and I was not prepared for the amount of time it took to kind of grow in those different steps to get to the place where I felt comfortable making those care management decisions. And then you always have your attendings help, and we have fellows. And I think in my facility specifically, we have a really good support system in our attending physicians. They have a lot of respect for nurse practitioners. They have a lot of respect for our role and our decision making. They give us quite a bit of autonomy and a lot of support. And then our fellows come in and we learn from each other. So we generally have a fellow rounding with each of our teams, and they also seem to have quite a respect for the nurse practitioners and our knowledge. So I appreciate that. So I feel like I've gotten a lot of support, but even with all of that support, I was just not prepared for that transition. And I don't think that's something, I think that my teachers did a good job of saying, hey, this is a hard transition, get ready. But I just don't know if you can even teach that. Like if you can put into words really what that is like and what it feels like. And then, you get through it and you're like, oh, okay, I survived. I can do this. But until you get to that point, it's fairly difficult. And I have really just appreciated all the help along the way, but it's tough.
I'd say there are two big misconceptions for a bedside NICU nurse. One is that I sit around and play with babies all day. And one is that all of my babies die all of the time. How can I do this? And so I try to explain that it's a meeting in the middle. Yes, my job can stink on days, but 95% of my days are amazing days because our wins are like 10 times bigger than anybody else's, right? When the 24-weeker goes home on just a whiff of oxygen and bottle feeding, amazing. Even if you send a baby home with a tracheostomy and a G tube, they're still going home, right? And so I find I have to kind of educate and clarify that I don't play with babies, but they don't all die either. And so those were the two big ones that I get a lot of questions when I tell people that I work in the NICU. They're like, oh, isn't that great playing with babies? Or, oh, isn't that sad? And like, we have both days actually, and I wouldn't trade any of those days for any other job, just because I think when you're made for the NICU, you're made for the NICU.
So I think some misconceptions in my role is that I look for problems. So whenever things don't go right, I usually get an email or have a conversation about things. And as a CNS, my role isn't to create problems, it's to help fix it and to engage the bedside staff and the medical team into being the problem solvers, right? So I feel like that sometimes is a misconception because as a CNS, if there's something that happens or there's a problem is specifically with the process or with a quality outcome, that you have to do a deeper dive and to look into the reasons why it happens. And there's always a reason, right? And then you take that evidence and you help build a better process or build a better way to do it to help make sure that you have better outcomes for your patients as well as and for the staff too, because and it's really focusing on what the bedside staff are doing and incorporating them into every single solution that there is. I have a little bit of a different, coming from a leader experience than Heather did. I am homegrown here at Hershey, so I've always been in NICU. I've always worked here. The staff know me as a bedside nurse, and then I progressed up to, I was in the operational leadership for a while, and then I became a CNS. Staff that have been here for a while know me as a baby nurse, and now they see me in a little bit of a different light. So it has been a challenge. I can appreciate that difference in role changing that Heather was sharing. But I can tell you that it's been also amazing to have the newer staff come in and being able to help mentor them and grow them and help them to present and apply to NAN for abstracts, for posters, and help facilitate that and help see people grow as a bedside nurse up to, and a lot of our team has gone to be nurse practitioners and they're coming back into our NICU. So that warms our hearts. That warms my heart as a CNS.
I think after hearing you talk, all of you, I see that there's so much passion with us. And I think Elizabeth said, like, you're just made to be a NICU nurse. And I think once you have that passion, it's so easy to take on that mentorship role to help those new nurses flourish and grow to be exceptional nurses, nurse practitioners, educators to, ultimately increase our outcomes for our babies, because that's why we're all there, for the babies and their families. So you all have such rich history and experience in the NICU, and you bring so much to the bedside. How has your role evolved as you gained more experience in the NICU?
So I will say that for me, I have been a nurse practitioner for almost 25 years now. And it has been an emotional struggle with this evolution. But what I've seen over the years is that I have now become the person who mentored me. I am now the person who convinced me that I could be an NNP. And I take that very seriously when I see what some of those mentors meant to me, still mean to me, but they are now retiring. And I am in that role where I am showing others the impact that we can have on families, the good things that we can do in this role. And I can only hope that I am as good a role model as those people were for me. I think with the evolution, just with the people that we have on the call here, we can see how we all work together and how in my role as the educator, I will definitely reach out to Heather Skaggs and say, okay, will you precept this student? And how can I help your team for helping me? For Elizabeth, as charge nurse, I will reach out and say, so how did my student do today? Was there anything that we can improve upon? And what do your nurses need from us? Is there any education that we can provide? Is there anything that we can do to help the team? For Heather Stevens, I'll reach out and say, okay, so my student needs to do a QI project. What does your unit need? How can we give back to that unit? And so that has taken time to truly understand that it is not just about the students coming into the classroom, reading the textbooks, getting the lectures, but it is really incorporating us as a part of these units, as a part of the team.
Just personally, I've seen myself grow in my confidence level from being a bedside nurse all the way up to CNS and seeing the holistic picture of caring for these babies. I think in the NICU, I spend a lot of my time here. I spend the majority of my time here more than I do with my own family. So I think of my NICU as a NICU family, and that's how I feel like I've incorporated the NICU, how we've evolved as a NICU nurse, that we have such a tight-knit group here. And we're also intertwined, like Tracy said, on how we all help either support each other at the bedside, help support the families, help facilitate quality improvement projects, with the entire focus being on the patient and the baby in the bed.
So I think there's two kind of evolutions in my world. As I started as a NICU nurse, I was terrified that I'd do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing, and you were afraid to talk to parents. And as I grew in my knowledge and my comfortableness, I became more, I guess, of an advocate for both the patients and the families. I became comfortable telling the parents hey, we had a rough day today. This is what happened. Or going to the doctor and saying, this baby is just not right. It took me a while to get comfortable with that, because as a new nurse, you think, oh, am I right? Am I making this up? The doctors really know. If they tell you it's fine, it's fine. And then as you grow, you're like, okay, no, I know I'm not making this up, and you get more comfortable with that. But in general, the NICU world in itself evolves, right? From where we started to where we are now with all of our new evidence-based practices and what's the best care, and always trying to stay on top of things. And so as I've learned more and taken on more roles, I've seen the importance of just NICU care evolving so that all these new practices are implemented and we get these best outcomes. And to do that, the nurses and the nurse practitioners have to evolve too in their knowledge and their comfort and their collaboration with other departments.
I think in my particular role, and I feel like now I need to redeem the NP role a little bit after I talked about how hard it was. And one of the things that I have noticed as I've evolved in my role, as I've kind of gotten more confident in all of those areas that I talked about before and becoming an overall care manager, um, you know, the love that I have for my role has certainly evolved. I don't know that I fully knew what I was getting myself into when I went back to school and decided to kind of take on this role. But I love the decision that I made. I love the involvement that I have in the care of these babies. And I think another area where I think my skills have really evolved is just becoming like a master collaborator, and almost like a chaos coordinator, if you will. You get really good at rounding up all the consultants and, getting all the information from your bedside nurse, who is an incredible resource, and understanding what your resources are. And I think that as you evolve as a nurse practitioner, you start to really understand, okay, I don't have to do everything. I just have to know who I can ask to help me. And having some of those like really good delegation skills and those coordination skills, that is when I really started to love my role, is when I was able to kind of evolve in that way and not put all that pressure on myself and think I have to do this on my own. I have to make all of these decisions and they all have to be the right decisions or this baby is going to suffer. It's not really what it's about. It's about getting confident in your own role and confident enough to say, hey, this is above me, or I don't know where to go for this, or, that, I guess that kind of attitude just makes the role so enjoyable. And I'm pretty extroverted. I'm social. So when I get to involve other people in what I'm doing, I also love it from that perspective. But you don't have to be, you don't have to be that kind of person to enjoy that collaboration and just knowing you have that support. So that's one big area that I feel like I've evolved. But also it kind of come full circle in my appreciation. I was a bedside nurse for over 7 years in the NICU, and I grieved that role when I transitioned to a nurse practitioner. But now I've kind of come back to just loving the relationship and the collaboration that I get to have with my bedside nurses, because their knowledge, their observation skills, all of that is just so valuable. And so I realized I don't have to like grieve not being the person in that role, because I can still collaborate and, help and kind of be a part of that in a small way as well. And then I think sometimes some more natural evolution, as we see, because we have nurse educators here, is once you're a little bit more confident in your role, I think a natural progression is to kind of move into some of those more teaching, mentoring roles. And I've certainly found over the last like year and a half, that has slowly worked its way into being more prevalent in my practice, as more of that mentorship and, new NPs coming in and saying, hey, Heather, I have this question, or can you help me with this? And being a resource is also kind of part of that evolution of being a nurse practitioner. And not just new practitioners, but the new fellows that come in, they look to you as a resource when you've been there a little bit longer. And it's always kind of a joy to be in that role and say, okay, well, I've made it to this point where people are confident enough in me that they can come to me and ask me to be one of those kind of helpers. And that's something that I really enjoy about the evolution of my role as well.
Well, thank you all for joining us today and leaving your mark with us. Your contributions have made a lasting impact. And here at NAN, we deeply appreciate the difference you've made. Make sure you never miss an episode of NANcast by subscribing now. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thanks for your support and letting us into your ears. Have a great day.